So this is an introduction slash preview of the palette work that I've been doing. I started it yesterday, and it's taken me a little while to kind of get my head around it fully, but I think I understand how the palette works on a spectrum now. So this is the sprite editor. If you are not familiar with this tool, it's a website, zx.remisharp.com. It all works in a browser, and I can edit my sprites. I can pick colors from my sprites here. So I'm holding down the Alt key, and it will pick out some of the colors that are being used. And I can select new colors and draw it as I please. The new part is this palette editor. So this now gives me a view and control of the palette that's being used with these particular sprites. So on the left here is the current palette that I'm working with, and it's also the default initial palette that the ZX Spectrum has. And on the right hand side are the 512 colors and the complete set. So there's a few UI changes if you've used my tool before, but the one thing I want to kind of point out is here we have the particular pixel I'm sitting on top of. It gives me this I value. The I151 is the index in the palette. C is the next 9-bit color, so it's a hex value of 12F. And then finally, this is I'm showing you the hex CSS color. So if you're familiar with some color, like CSS colors, then you'll have an idea of what the color really looks like. And same goes over here as well. And I've also added this color search, which I think is pretty neat. It allows me to search for color in the full 512 list. So if I type in red, it'll highlight where the red is. I can search for grey, the elusive grey. Both spellings work. So if I go back to red and do grey, it'll find the color. And you can also put in CSS colors. So here I'm looking for CCC. It gives me kind of the best. It also gives me the best kind of match to that color. So you can see there is no CCC value, but DB is a pretty close match. And I can use that to kind of change the palette over here. I've got a to-do list that I'm kind of working on. The first one is global transparency, being able to set that value of transparency to get an idea of what your palette will look like. And at the moment, the download is just the 9-bit version of the colors. I'm not quite sure about the 8-bit colors. I'm not sure if I've got my head around them yet. And the configuring the priority support. So you can flag each like individual palette indexes to have priority, so it sits above layers, and I guess sprites maybe, but it will sit above the transparency will kind of, I guess, paint on top of whatever's below it. Anyway, so I haven't done that, and I don't have any UI for that. But you can drag and drop existing palette files into this tool. So I've grabbed platform.nxp from the SD card under dev, and then tile tools, I think. And if you drop it in on top of the palette, it will change the current palette and give you a preview of what that will look like with the sprites. So you saw when I dropped it, immediately it kind of updated all my sprites, and we can see they are no longer kind of orange and green. So we drop that back in, see it's changed the color. So the sprite editor now kind of it shows you the particular color index, or the index from the palette rather than the color itself. So again, when I'm hovering over these colors, you can see this kind of magenta. It is the palette index 227, which is where transparency used to be. So I can go ahead and just fix that. So if I pick that color 227, and I think it's down here somewhere, 227, I'm going to select the color in my palette, and I'm going to change it to transparency, and all of this kind of updates immediately, which is exactly what I want. I've got a feeling that there's a small bug here. This should be actually transparent, and it would update the kind of palette shortcut as well, but it's a work in progress. What else do I want to show you? So I just want to show you a demo with code. So if I drop in this demo sprite, it looks all red, but actually it uses this index 18 for a different color. So we change that to, I don't know, white. We can see there's actually a face sitting in there. So I've downloaded the palette before I made the change and downloaded the palette after I made the change. And in code, it looks like this. So I am loading my sprite. I'm loading the two palettes into bank 25 and 26. I'm setting the palette dimension, I don't know, to 9-bit. Again, I don't have 8-bit support just yet. And then I'm setting the first bank for the sprites to bank 25, sorry, the first palette to 25, the second palette to bank 26, and I'm selecting the first palette to start off with, and then I'm just going to draw my sprite, wait in a rather aggressive fashion for a key press, and then I'm going to switch over to the different palette, and you should see that working like this. So that's the sprite in all its red glory. Hit enter, switched out the palette to this alternative palette, and I'm going to be using that for my own code in my levels where I can use the same sprites and tiles, but I'm going to change the palette so that the color of my level basically changes based on my palette. So this isn't live yet. I'm kind of open to feedback. I think the UI might change over time. I think it's a pretty bare, pretty aggressive. But if there's any suggestions or any kind of obvious thing that I missed, I'd love to hear about it. Otherwise, thanks for watching.